I'm Jordan.
And I'm Rosanna.
And on this podcast, we explore how to take life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursue a life worth living together. Welcome to Season 6, Episode 6 of the Relentless Pursuit podcast. Should we give our kid a cell phone?
Yeah, I've been looking forward to having this conversation for a long time, and I am a little nervous to have it too. So what everyone's about to hear is an actual conversation between a husband and a wife about their oldest son, who is currently 11, and whether or not he should get a cell phone.
Right. He's about to turn 12. He's currently in 6th grade. But, the school year's almost over, and here we are.
Yeah. So I'm nervous about having this conversation because I think it's a big topic. There's a lot that goes into it. I don't know if this conversation will end up being longer than some of our typical conversations, but I just think that it's good. So, what you'll actually hear is a real, honest conversation. We've talked about this off and on, but this is the first time, we did research. We have our notes. We're really going to come to a decision here by the end of this conversation about what to do with the cell phone question.
Right, and I don't think that there's necessarily a right or wrong answer to this question. I think it's, what is right for our kid and our family now. And I think that is based on specifically our family and where we're at, and specifically our kid. Because if, we were having this conversation about our second or third or fourth kid.
Oh, by the fourth kid, it'll be like, here, you want two phones? Here you
go. So, things change. So it's, it's kind of like when you're parenting for the first time, or it's your oldest, right? You're a little bit more protective, a little more guarded. And so you and I have agreed to disagree about this for a while. We just haven't really
We haven't made a move. We haven't committed to anything.
But we also haven't been on the same page, because while one of us is it's not the end of the world, another one of us is it's too soon, too many risks, not doing it.
Yeah. All right. So the time has come to decide where we stand. I feel we're wading out into the pool. You first get to the pool, and then as soon as you touch it with your toe, the water feels cold, and you've got to inch your way in. And then once you're wet and you're swimming around, it doesn't bother you anymore. We're at the point where this water is very cold to us. So instead of diving right in, we're gonna look, how deep is it? Is there a lifeguard on duty? Anyway, so we're talking about this because he's asking for one, of course.
Well, our kids have all been asking for one. They're since 3 years ago, all of our friends have cell phones. You talk to the moms in the parking lot at school. Does your kid have a cell phone? No. Does your kid have a cell phone? No. Does your kid have? Why is my kid saying everyone has a cell phone? And that looks different.
It certainly feels like everyone has a phone.
Some kids at home have a parent's old phone that, when connected to Wi-Fi, they use for chatting with friends and games. But not everyone has a cell phone.
Yeah. So somebody said this to me years ago, and this stuck with me. They said a phone, or they were referencing an iPad actually, but I think it still applies. They said it's like a hammer, and it can be used for great building, but if you don't know what you're doing with it, it can also be used for great destruction. And so that's why I think a conversation between parents about just especially all things electronics is especially warranted, because there's a lot of benefits. But if we just go in only thinking of those benefits and forgetting that there are many much more powerful detriments to it, then we could be doing a great disservice to our kid.
Right. And so, how many conversations have we had that come back to this idea of technology and being connected and being too connected? And so that's part of the conversation. But then there's a very real, kind of basic part of the conversation where, when we were kids, although we did not have a personal device or a personal phone to talk as, elementary or middle schoolers, we had a phone in our house that we could pick up and call our friends and say, hey, can you play today? Hey, do you want to go to the park?
Right. I remember being trained how to answer the phone. It's hello, this is Jordan. Who am I speaking to?
Oh, wow.
Right, or something like that.
Right.
I've lost that skill. But yeah, because you didn't know who was calling, and it was the one phone, and you had your 5 closest friends' phone numbers memorized.
Correct. I probably could still recite.
I can still tell you a few phone numbers.
Yeah. I know yours, because we had to dial back then too. So
yeah.
But, so there are these very practical reasons why, maybe these kids do need a phone, but then the conversation grows to all right, so then what are the parameters for phone usage? And, Like when can they have it? When can't they? What do they have access to?
Yeah.
Just because you have a phone doesn't mean you have a social media account.
Well, and that's what I want to get into. And so we'll try to define some of those parameters. So tell me if this is on or off the table. Because when we say phone, what we really mean is smartphone. But why does it have to be a smartphone? So is flip phone on the table?
I would say flip phone should not be on the table.
Okay.
Because I think I'm always more concerned with, obviously I want our kids to be good kids, obedient, respectful, all of that. But there is, especially when you're a 12-year-old middle school kid, you don't want to be the outsider.
No.
And so I'm not saying that, our kids should do everything that they can to fit in, but you don't want to do anything to make it harder for your kid. And
Okay.
so I think that's something to consider too.
All right. So then on that point, so to the point that you were making before, then it's not just a phone, but it's everything that comes with it. So from texting, social media, games, internet access, the portability, the expenses, the entertainment.
Yeah. So it's not just, are we giving our kid a phone? It's how do we decide what kind of phone and what are the parameters around which our kid can use it?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that's all I had in the way of setup. I do have a few statistics actually to put this in context.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So according to Common Sense Media, this is from 2019. I had a hard time finding something that was a little bit more recent. But as of 2019, 53% of kids by year 11 had a cell phone of their own. 69% by the time they turned 12 do. This is United States children.
Okay. And I had something, but it was actually even dated prior to that in 2017, approximately 45% of U.S. children between the ages of 10 and 12 had their own smartphone with a service plan.
Yeah. Okay. So definitely if you reach age 11, then you are without a phone, then you're in the minority, a growing minority. So I'm thinking.
It's almost as if it's become this like new rite of passage.
Yes. But the question is at what age? Because that's a tough age as it is. So to introduce something as powerful as a phone at that age, it just requires conversation. It requires a strong family to make sure it is initiated properly.
At the beginning of the school year, there were a few moms at the gym that all have kids the same age as we do, that they've been in elementary school together and we're now making that transition to junior high. And they were like, hey, what are you guys doing about cell phones? We're thinking about getting so-and-so a cell phone. Yeah, we're thinking about it too. Are you going to do it? Like, why not? And, to one of the mom's points, it was like, my kid is not like one of those, we've given it to her and it was like at the beginning of August because we don't want it to be this new thing that she's obsessed with when she's like starting school. She's like, so like having some rules about like when she can use it and how she can use it and all of that, because if we don't train them how to do it responsibly from now and we just like randomly give them one when they're 14 or 15, like how are they going to learn how to responsibly use it if we're not like kind of like setting those guardrails for them?
Yeah, I think that's similar to conversations I've heard around drinking in the United States, where you can't have it at all, and you're not supposed to want it. You're not supposed to consume any alcohol. And then suddenly, magically at 21, like then you know how to use it. And then what ends up happening is kids who have never been exposed to it go off to college, even under the age of 21, and they're just uneducated about it. And so like versus European nations where it's just much more openly used and openly discussed. You have lower rates of alcoholism, lower rates of abuse.
Well, and then they have stricter consequences for people. So people make smarter decisions because they know it's like, yeah, you can't have 5 DUIs. Like after your first one, like you're done. You never drive again. So it's, they mean business.
Yeah. Sorry. So that makes sense is like, let's introduce it when they're young enough for it to like make sense, for it to be like steadily introduced, and we can like teach them how to properly wield this before they're just completely on their own. All right, so that sounds like a good time to transition into our pros and cons segment of the show. So we've both listed. I wrote pros and cons. What do you have? Benefits and risks.
Sure.
Sounds like the same thing. And so let's go through the pros first. Why is this time, as an 11-year-old in 6th grade, the right time?
some say like around this time in the middle school years is when kids are more likely to be involved in after school activities and more likely to be left home alone. And so for that reason, if like your kid gets home from school every day at 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and a parent is coming home within the hour, right? They let themselves in. They're responsible enough at, I believe it's like legally like 12 or 13 to be home by yourself. And so if they're at home, like I would want to know, I think just as a parent, like, okay, the oldest is supposed to come home. The younger ones are supposed to follow. They're waiting it out until mom or dad, like, come over, or a grandparent or something like that. When we were younger, the first thing that we did when we walked in from school is we picked up the phone. We called our mom's desk at work and said, "Hey, we're home from school." And she was like, "Great, I'll see you in an hour and a half." And it was just kind of like this check-in, like my kid is home safe and everything is okay and I feel better. So, that's why they say like around this age is if you don't have a home phone, like how do you communicate with your parents that everything is okay?
Well, that's one of the things that I've written down as well, is that we don't have home phones anymore. I think you and I haven't had one for at least a decade. And it just changes the dynamic of how communication happens, even just within the family. So that is one definite pro.
And the same thing too is, he has intramurals before school. He has clubs that he stays at after school. But we have other kids. And so sometimes I'm having to pick up or drop off multiple kids from multiple places. So it would be great if I could just send him a text that says, "I need you to walk home after school because I need to go drop off one of your siblings. I'll be home shortly after you get there." But like when plans change or I have to pick up a sick kid, like it would be a great way to communicate with our oldest, like, okay, I need this to happen as opposed to the plan that we had made this morning.
Yeah. All right. So I scoured the internet for lists about reasons why you should let your kid have a phone, why it's a good idea. And so just to put some of what we're saying into a big umbrella, one of the things that somebody said was a big plus. I'm going to call many of these into question when we get to the cons. But the big plus is it lets you stay in touch with your child at all times.
Which can be a plus.
And the one that comes right after that is gives access to one another during an emergency. And which is different. Like sometimes it could just be like a change of plans versus an actual emergency.
Right. Well, and I think of too our oldest and just his disposition. Like I know there have been times when he's like socially out, and like not that anything bad has ever happened, but like he was somewhere and he didn't really like the vibe of what was happening, and he didn't know how to deal with that. So like if he wanted to text and say like, some stuff's going down at the park, like I think I just want to leave, can you come pick me up? Like I want him to feel like he can make an honest decision and let me know that like he needs to leave where he's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's valuable if we're teaching our kids like to make good decisions and to not be places where, things that are happening that they feel uncomfortable with are. I've heard in the situation of like young girls, like being out and having, and like being approached by someone, and having a girl like text, like, "We want to be picked up from Starbucks now. Like, we don't feel safe. We there's someone here that's making us feel uncomfortable." Like, I think that's an important, skill to teach.
Yeah. All right. Another one that goes along with that, another pro that I found was that GPS tracking is possible. So it lets you know where your child is.
Which for some of our children later on will be probably very important for us.
Maybe. All right. So that is a component. Anything else to add about that?
No, yeah. "Mom, I'm going to the park." And then when you see that they're at the park or not at the park, it's a great way to text and be like, "Hey, where you at?
Yeah.
Came to the park, you're not here."
This is a big one. Like this, of all the pros, I feel like this is the one that is, it just hits the most with me. It keeps them connected to friends via text. So like in the olden days, if we wanted to call a friend, we would pick up the phone, dial their phone number, talk to their mom and ask it to speak to
"Yeah, hi Mrs. Brown, can Joey come over?"
Yeah, right. We would say that. That it doesn't happen that way anymore. And so now, like, there is no family phone. If a friend wants to talk to one of our kids, they have to go through us, which is kind of weird, especially if that friend does have a phone. Like right now, I'm in a text group on my phone with all of our son's friends, or not all of them, but
right. Like but on like their little core group.
Yeah. And it's funny. And they don't even know that it's me. I think they think that it's actually Jack, but they start having conversations, and if I don't look at my phone for a while, there's like 50, like 60 messages in this huge thread about where they're going to play, or some fun stuff. But that's how kids are communicating now. So just like if someone wants to engage with our son, like they're going to text him, and now they can't. And that really kind of closes the door and opportunities for him to be included. And for me, like as a parent, I don't want him to miss out on opportunities like that.
Right, because he always has the option to participate or not, but to like be kept out of the circle because you don't have a phone, is it's kind of sad.
Yeah. So like whether we like it or not, that's the reality. And so that's why that one connects with me a little bit more as a viable pro.
Well, we have to remember that like it's not the same as when we were kids, and we can't expect our kids to have the same childhood or to communicate the same way that we used to, or it used to be, even our parents' generation, they didn't call each other. They just got on their bikes and then took off to however many blocks away, and wrangled the gang, and then they were out all day.
Yeah, I used to do. I had like the neighborhood friends. Like I'm going to go by Kenny's house. It's like 2 blocks away. Like okay,
right.
And Kenny has a couple friends like by him, and then we would all hang out together.
Right. And then it was like now we're the parents where we set up the play dates where the parents are always in charge and they're always supervising, and now it's like that the kids are in charge, and so we have to constantly shift with that, and not saying that we have to do what our kids want, but we have to like realize that it's just different.
Mm-hmm. All right, I have a few other pros. Anything you want to throw in though?
No, I have other things to explore, but keep going.
A phone allows access to positive entertainment like educational podcasts. I call it positive entertainment just because it's not like what you and I call gagats, right? So they already have access to all kinds of entertainment through everything else we have. This is just one more platform that they would have, which I think, as long as we're talking specifically about our oldest, like I think he would enjoy like being able to listen to things like podcasts. Right now he uses his school Chromebook
Right.
to listen to certain things, which is fine and it works. But if he takes the dog for a walk, for example, it's like just one thing that I personally enjoy, like listening to something if I'm walking the dog. I think he would get a kick out of that too.
And he had complained about, he's like, I hate when I walk the dog alone. Like, it's just kind of so lonely and it's so boring. And so I had pulled out like an old phone and downloaded a couple like appropriate podcasts. I'm like, hey, like, let's talk about things you like. Found it, downloaded it to the phone, and, plugged in some earphones for him. And he like walked, he's like, that was actually kind of nice, So yeah. He is, he's obviously our oldest. I say he's very responsible. He's like a really obedient kid. Like, I feel like I can trust him with that stuff. And so one of the questions when I think about this is it's not like a pro, but it's like, is your child responsible enough to carry a cell phone, right? He always knows where his items are. He always charges his school electronics. Like, he takes care of his stuff. And so like to be able to trust him with giving him a phone is like, I know that I can trust him with that.
Yeah. Actually, that is on my list of pros. Just in general, a phone is an important level of trust and responsibility given to a child. So it is, in that sense, like a coming of age item, where it's now you've achieved the next belt, like towards adulthood.
Right.
You have gotten to this level of proficiency. We can trust you. You are responsible enough to at least use this under the guidelines that we have. So here you go.
Right. You have to charge it. You break it. It's like, it's something that you would have to repair. Yeah. There's a lot with kind of like responsibility and trust in there, kind of built in. And I don't know that, kids are ready for that before a certain age.
Right. And that's why, and we'll say this again at the end too, and you already brought this up, but this is a like kid specific conversation. So like when we go to have this for our second kid, like we'll bring up all the same questions and pros and cons, but we'll weigh that against who he is and
where he's at.
Yeah. Okay. That's my list of pros. Any other good reasons why a kid at any age should have a phone?
No, I think they're mostly centered around being able to communicate in an emergency situation, and not emergency as always in 911, but being able to get a hold of them, and then opportunities for social contact with peers. I think those are really the two biggest ones.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the fun part then, the cons. Why shouldn't we? This list ended up being twice as long as the pros for me.
Yeah. you can start with anything from, impact on health to social interactions, right? We're like, oh, this is a great way for him to connect with his friends. But, then there's the entire flip side. I
Right.
mean, I think we've held off this long. And I think like after 5th grade, I was probably like, he could probably have one, would be fine. And you were like, absolutely not. And I think maybe that comes from your time as a high school administrator and what you have found, seen, and heard on kids' cell phones.
I had a lot of interesting conversations about kids and their phones and the misuses. So I'm sure that does color this conversation. Before we get that far, though, I want to go back to there are 2 pros that we listed. Pro number 1, it lets you stay in touch with your child at all times. Pro number 2, there's GPS tracking, which lets you know where your kid is at all times. My first 2 cons. It lets you stay in touch with your kid at all times, and it lets you know where your kid is at all times. Now, though, like I actually read from websites where like their number 1 tip, like if you're going to give your kid a phone, make sure you enable the GPS tracking, and that's like just like a hard and fast rule. For me, I don't buy into that quite as much, and maybe this is just because I think older. But I don't know if it's to our kid's advantage to know that his parents are tracking him wherever he goes.
Well, I would say it's like the same thing where it's like both a positive and a negative. If as a kid, you know that at any point your parent can decipher where you are, is that going to help you make a better choice?
Yeah. And like the idea is yes, but I would also look at it the other way. If you know that no one's looking over your shoulder and you have to make decisions for yourself, what would you choose? And so I think that's a muscle that kids need to exercise. I think that they need to know, like, okay, and same thing with it lets you stay in touch with your child at all times. Like if there's a situation at the park, like you're going to need to know that you can't just call mom and dad and that they're going to like solve it for you. Like for me, and the park that we're talking about is within easy walking distance. You'd just be like, just leave and walk home. Or right, there's other solutions that are available
but as
there.
like an 11 or 12-year-old, maybe you still need the guidance of a parent to say, if you feel uncomfortable, then you should come home. Mm-hmm. Right? When he's 15, he's not going to like text me that. But when he's 15 and he's at a party with older kids and they're drinking and he needs to be picked up, then he needs to be able to use that device and say, I need to come home. I need you to come pick me up.
So I think it depends on the circumstances. So I'm not sold on the fact that, and I know a lot of teenagers who their parents do have the GPS enabled. I'd say it more typical than not. And I'm just not sold on that, at least. So I don't mind the idea of being able to be in touch with one another for whatever reason. But the actual like tracking, I feel like, at least for our oldest, is not something I feel like is useful. It just probably does a little bit more harm than good. And then we're checking like, oh, where is he? Oh, he's still where he said he was.
Well,
and even if he's
I
not,
think
it's
that's
like
fine.
good for you.
You can enable that. I
Yeah.
mean, we live in a time and in a world where things are a little bit scarier than they used to be when we were kids. And so if the phone is on our kids and for some reason we need to find them and we can use that as a tool because it's activated, I think that's fine. If you're just constantly staring at like their GPS whereabouts and like tracking him walk home all 4 blocks, you might have a problem. So I mean,
we actually have that for the buses now. Did you see that?
I saw that app. Yeah.
So
when the
how many
parents
more
complain,
minutes until they get
it's
dropped
68 minutes after school let out. Where is this bus?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, there are tools put in play for a purpose. It doesn't mean that you need to like really, be tracking them at every moment, but I'm sure that is helpful. I mean, I'm thinking back to when I was a high schooler. How many times was I somewhere that I told my parents I was and I was not? In high school, never. In college, maybe like...
Well, in college, I think you can tell your parents to go fly a kite.
Well, but like that's what I mean. Like, I think it depends on the kid. But I know that there were a ton of kids in high school and even junior high who told their parents they were somewhere and they were doing something, illegal somewhere else. So
yeah,
again, depending on your kid,
yeah,
you might need it.
All right, so this is an age-specific con. I don't think it's a big one, but it says kids 8 to 12 probably won't be alone that often anyway. So if they really need a phone, they can just use whichever adult is supervising them.
It's true, but now we're at the point where like we need to drop off someone for dance here or take someone there. And like we want to give Jack that freedom. You want to come? No? Okay, you can stay here. And I think that's great. But I think he should always be able to be connected to somebody.
And actually, this is a pro that we didn't talk about, is that he is at the age where he might be home alone for short periods. And we're really talking like, what's the most? Like, I think 20 or 30 minutes.
Say maybe
usually
40.
while we're dropping another kid off
Yeah.
somewhere and he doesn't want to come. And like in our day, like the house phone is always there. And so if you need to call, you just call. Now, like if we're out of the house and we both have our phones, he's completely disconnected. Which, I mean, there's no emergencies, right? We feel secure, right? It's a short time out of the house. But then you wonder, just in case, if he needs to call us or if there's an emergency in that short period of time. All right, so I'm glad I remembered that. All right, D. This is perhaps my biggest con.
Okay.
One of my biggest cons. It costs money.
Ladies and gentlemen, the cheapest man in the United States.
Well, I'm a strategic spender.
Strategic spender. There
Right,
you
so
go. I like
it
that.
costs money. So I know it costs money. So my question for you is, who pays for what?
That's a great question. And I think that's something that we would really have to like dive into. Is it a right or is it a privilege? If it's a right, we pay for it. If it's a privilege,
It's not a right, that's for sure.
Right, he has to earn it. And so how does he earn it? Like, he does help around the house. He has learned to like put in a load of wash. There are certain things that he does that I don't even have to ask, and he's just very responsible for. So it's like, is it if he keeps up with those things without like having to have a list of chores or hound him about like that, like that's how he earns it? Or is it that he does those items and, earns money for it, which then in turn,
That's true. And we've never given our kids an allowance. We're not even against it. We just don't really have cash around to be handing
Right.
to them.
Let me sell you.
Do you
accept Venmo?
That's the real reason. But I would say, like, I don't mind. What I would really envision is giving him one of our old phones, like if and when we choose to upgrade. And so he has a functional phone.
Right, not the
There's
latest
no
and
way
greatest.
I'm buying him like the newest and greatest.
$1,300 iPhone, yeah.
He can get himself that one, but buy him a functional product. But then we can get a cheap phone plan. Like right now, you like for as much as you use yours, that's $20 a month. So if he's using it a fraction of the time, like it's not expensive.
No, it's not. And even like people who have, like we have some like, I don't want to say like a random kind of cuckoo plan, but we do. It's not Verizon, it's not T-Mobile, and it's not Sprint. It's like not one of the big three. But like for them, it's like you basically buy the phone, you add a line, and it's like $5.
Yeah.
It's like nothing, or it's free. It's like
And it works.
right.
So I don't think it's out of line to say that he pays for it. He actually has tons of money from between Christmas and birthday and other like odd jobs that he's done for neighbors and things. And he's not spending it. Like, so I almost think that's part of like, this is your phone. This is your responsibility. Like we're just giving this to you, and the device itself is, a few $100s. So you can pay like the couple bucks a month or whatever that is equivalent to. And I think that's part of the responsibility of it, is like you now have something that you're enjoying that you wanted, but it has
there's a cost.
a nominal monetary expense. So we can, that's just one thing to consider. So we're not actually making any decisions now, but that'll come into play if and when we decide to move forward. Okay, let's get into some other cons here. I'm not even halfway through my list. It gives broad access to the internet. So that means that it's harder to monitor and control. So another thing that we have to address is just like the type of device that it is. What's great about a television is that they're stationary, and it's big. So you almost always know what's on the TV, unless you're in a completely different room or disconnected from that. But with a phone, a kid can take that anywhere. And if it's just regular internet access, you can access anything. And so it's a little bit harder, like even if they are on the same couch as you, to know what they're looking at, much
Right.
less in a different room.
Or you got earpods on and you don't know what they're listening to either.
Right. So there's a lot to say about that, but that's a con. Another one kind of going along with it is that it gives broad access to other people. I mean, you can connect with strangers from across the world, which in some ways is a pro, right? You can be exposed to a variety of people and perspectives and relationships. But for the most part, especially for an 11-year-old kid, I see that as a con where,
Well, that's, I mean, yes, but is that kid has a smartphone with like social media accounts. So is he on like TikTok, Instagram, what's the other, Snapchat, like whatever. So that part of the conversation is, can our son have a phone? Okay, he can have a phone. Can he text
what's
and call
on
his
it?
friends? Yes, but will he have a private social media account? At this point, I would say no. I don't think he needs it.
And that's one thing that I don't really have listed here because it's not a conversation about social media, but it kind of is. And so right now, I think we're both leaning towards the same direction where like a phone is one thing, but then social media is something else that would probably come later.
I was gonna say, right, something that you earn when you're like more responsible, can handle more content.
And then we choose like one form of social media. All right, which one do you want? Are you on Instagram? Okay, let's download that. And then the first two people you're going to friend are mom and dad.
Oh, wait, you don't have an Instagram.
Oh, I just log on to yours. Okay. Couple other things. One is that another one is that it contributes to what's called an always on mentality, where you're never really disconnected from your digital life. And so especially for kids, a lot more of just how they interact with the world is through these digital mediums. We see that a little bit already with video games and just some of the silly ways that they are like connecting with one another through the tools that they have available. And phones open that up a little bit more. But one of the things that relates to is like when you socialize with your friends at school, then that's a very real place where people gather. But when you go home, and even though you're alone in your room, you're still able to interact with your friends from school, which could be a good thing, like we've said. But do you feel like you always need to be engaging with them, always checking to see if someone's engaging with you? The big downside is with bullying, where bullies were limited to like hallways in school, but now they can, through texting and through social media, like continue to do or say certain things that are harassing. And so, there's just this opportunity to being connected in the digital world far more often with other people than you really would be in real life.
Yeah. And, there's just a lot that can go wrong socially. That's one of the things, that I have listed. And I think that's why it's important to like think about your child's maturity level. And like they're like recognizing social cues. Like, is your kid the one that's like constantly always texting other people? Like, do you not get that you can't just like you wouldn't just like continue to call someone's house like all the time? Like, texting it's different, but it's the same. Like, right, that there are barriers and boundaries, and right, as a kid you shouldn't be texting people early in the morning or late, like people are sleeping, people have lives. Like how do you teach them what's appropriate?
I heard a funny story where someone was like a teen girl was getting texts at like 2 a.m, and then the comparison was the same thing. Like back in the day, if you had a friend calling the house at 2 a.m, like it better darn well be an emergency.
Right.
If they're just like socializing, right, or being dramatic, or like if it can't wait until the morning,
right?
like
So
what are you
there's
doing?
a lot there,
Yeah.
right? So like it's not even, it's not even that your kid's not doing it. What are other kids using their devices for, and how does that like influence and impact like what your kid sees? We talked a little bit about social media, but it's like knowing that like once you post, that people are going to see that like forever, like it lives out there forever.
And that's one of the things I want to talk about, not specific to social media, but just the kind of education that needs to come along with handing your child this device. And so that's one of the things. Like any button you press on this, no matter what it is, it lives forever. So whatever you type in, whatever you click on, whatever you explore, whatever you post, everything is permanent.
Right. Yeah, and I think the cyberbullying thing, yeah, I mean, we've seen that, through stories from our kids at school, like so-and-so was posting this, and then anybody who like engaged in that content, through their TikTok, through their Instagram, through their whatever, was like able to be identified and like pulled in, like regarding it. And so, like how do you safeguard your kids to know like how to handle that and what to engage in and what not to?
So going along with that, I have that your child has greater access to other people's behaviors. So even if they're not the target of someone's negative interaction, you can often be the spectator or recipient of it. And frankly, like especially junior hires, but I'm just going to say people in general are mean and stupid and it doesn't take much. Like someone could literally send you something and like an airdrop, you don't even know what they're sending, you accept it and suddenly it's on your phone. And now you're responsible for what has just been submitted to you. Or somebody posts something online and you're one of their followers, and now you are exposed to like this friend of yours, but doing something that they would never really do in public or in polite conversation.
Yeah. Well, and so I think, it's just such a bigger conversation with our kids. Like whatever the decision we make is it's, like someone sends you something that's inappropriate. Like you as a 12-year-old boy, how do you handle that? Mm-hmm. I don't think I would be embarrassed at all to say like someone sends you something like regardless of what it is. And especially if it's inappropriate, you have to come to one of us because we kind of have to know that like now you're a part of whatever this is. And it doesn't necessarily reflect on you, but like we need to show you like how to handle it, and we need to be aware of what's going on so that we're not blindsided by it, by a teacher or an administrator or the police,
Yep.
So, I mean, it's just, yeah.
So these are some of the things. This is why I say, like, for me, a lot of the detriments outweigh the benefits because you think about the cost of some of these. And again, this part of our job as a parent is to worry and to think worst case scenario.
Of course.
All right, what else? The phone will be interesting to them. That's a con in my mind because now we see this so much with ourselves. You see this with adults, but we're interested in what's going on the phone, even if nothing is going on, right? And so imagine another person in the household. It hurts to say this, but imagine another person in the household using the phone like you and I use the phone.
I'm over here.
Right. It's like, wait. Yeah, we were having a conversation. Can I get some eye contact? And now it's just another reason to be engrossed in what's going on the screen instead of what's going on with your family.
Well, so I think then it escalates things for us in terms of like how we're using our phone and what the rules are regarding that, right? Like there's a spot that the phones go at family dinner. And I mean, because he would be about 12 and getting his own phone. Obviously, his phone would probably need to stay like in a centralized area where a parent can see where it is at all times, right? Like whether it's on the counter or the windowsill or something like that. Like that's where it charges. That's kind of where it lives. It doesn't like necessarily like live in his room where we can't see it or I don't go up there. And so like, it's a good check for us. Like, what are we doing right now? Like, are our phones up on the counter? Or, are they away? Same thing. Where does the phone live at night when it charges? It's not going to, charge next to his bed, but where does mine charge? Next to my bed. So like maybe it will get us to kind of think about how we're using it and how we're modeling that to him as well.
That is all of my cons. I will share one example though. This is from Leonard Sachs. He's a psychologist and author. And I went to a conference of his a number of years ago. One of the illustrations he gave about teenagers and just some of the cons that have slipped into society related to phone use is like you used to be a good parent if your kid was alone in their room, at home at 10 p.m. at night. Now, you could be considered a bad parent if your kid is alone in their room at 10 p.m. at night because they're using a device unsupervised. You don't know who they're talking to. You don't know what they're accessing unless you're taking steps to be proactive and aware of those things. So that illustration always stuck with me because that really is the case. Right now our kids are young. They live in a happy little bubble. We don't really have to worry about that. But that's why like this device, just maybe some of you listeners can tell, like I have a little bit of anxiety, like just talking through some of these because I'm thinking about like the worst case things that can feasibly happen if we're not careful.
Well, and part of the thing to remember too is that the phone shouldn't replace our kids spending time with other kids in real time, in person. right? But I've
But
also,
it is
I know, but
for so many kids.
right. So like we should want our kids, especially when they're older, to be out with friends at 10 o'clock at night playing, a pickup soccer game like at an indoor arena, right? They're with their friends and they're moving and they're doing something fun. But
That's kind of late for a pickup
whatever,
soccer game.
you know what I mean? Well, you're a high school boy and you play soccer, right? Like, oh, we're going to rent this court and we're going to go play soccer until 10. Great. But the other thing too I see is like two kids sitting at someone's house on a phone, both watching TikTok together on their separate devices.
On separate devices, yeah.
And so they're not really engaging with each other. They're not even like making a TikTok together. Like they're just literally just sitting like scrolling.
And that's one of the things that I can't recall his name, but one of the critics of, especially of social media, is that, I earlier compared the phone to a hammer, except my hammer right now is just sitting waiting for me on my workspace in the garage. With a phone, it actually calls to you. Like there are things implanted in apps. Yeah. Like, right, there are notifications. It gets in your head. So unlike other tools, a phone especially is designed to draw you to it, which also draws you away from other people.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's a lot to be said about that. We're going to maybe have the same conversation in a year or however many years about social media, and then you'll really hear me.
Well, by then we'll be living in the metaverse, so
it won't matter. I guess it won't be a big deal then. Okay. So do you have any other cons, any detriments, any things to add there?
No, I mean, I think, what can be a pro can also be a con. And I think it's really about the conversations and the rules you set up with a phone. And it's, what you allow your kid to access and what's there and constantly checking in and checking up. Like, I think that's part of it. When the kids have always had like video games, like we had, what did we have? The Nintendo Wii when we got married.
Yeah.
And so we had that and we had fun with that when we were like married and we had kids. And so we had still had it. So when the boys were little, like I remember like, my parents would come over your parents and we'd Wii bowl with like our 4 and 6 year olds and it wasn't a big deal. And we finally like graduated up to like a Nintendo Switch. Mm-hmm. And then Jack is like the Switch is great, but like, all my friends are playing these games on an Xbox. And it's kind of like that slow progression of like, moving on from Mario to something else. And so now it's, he plays that, but his younger siblings don't use that because they use things that are more appropriate for him. And so now like this first stage of cell phones is kind of like that. Like it's a cell phone with these parameters, these guidelines, and social media may or may not come later for you. And that might be different than your friends, but like this is the pace in which we're ready to allow you to have access to more.
Yeah. I think that's good to consider that because things that I've read have said like don't base your decision off of the peer factor, like who has phones and what they're doing with them.
I met some of your parents. I'm not impressed. Like I'm not going to let that sway me to give my kid a device.
Right. I think it's good advice, but I also think that that's like, as we said, like one of the major components, like what are your peers doing? How are kids interacting these days? How can we make sure ours is connected with them? So we're towing that line between doing our own thing and also being aware of the environment that our kids are growing up in.
Well, and lucky for our kids, I've been home for a bulk of their childhood, so they're not being bounced between like working parents and schedules where they are left for longer periods of time, or they have older siblings, right? When you're the youngest of 4 and you've got like a 20-year-old sibling and you got your phone a little earlier than your original sibling did. And so, you got to toe the line between all of that.
All right. So I have some general tips. If we do decide to move forward, I found 3 hot tips.
Hot off the press.
1 is provide a phone that can be controlled and accessed and limited by parents.
Yeah. I mean, you could set those like screen time, right?
It's like restrictions.
Right.
Yeah. There's apps that you can use to we can install an app on their phone that then we can monitor all their interactions on our phone. Another one is make it clear that the phone can only be used in certain times, places, and ways. And the third one that goes along with that is that there must be discussion. We cannot just give it to them with open use and no guidelines.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's great.
Okay. So I was feeling good as we entered this conversation, but the more we had it, Now we're at this is the point of the show where we actually talk through what we want to do.
Okay.
So I'm not feeling it. Like what, I don't know what.
You're not feeling it. All right.
I'm not feeling it. So talk me into this.
Okay.
Because right now, based on all those cons I just listed, I'm in a bad place.
Well, you're in a bad place because you're picturing all of the high schoolers that you worked with that use their phones inappropriately. And so when I'm thinking about this choice, I'm thinking specifically about our son and who he is and who he has proven to be. May he only be, 11 going on 12. This is what I do know about him. He is responsible. He is careful. I know that we can hand him a phone and that he would take care of it. He's not going to be careless and like leave it somewhere or break it where it's like, all right, now I've put this money in and now, you've ruined it. So I feel like I can trust him with that. I know that I can trust him with the rules, and I know that there will be times where he will need to be like reminded. But I think if we say like this phone can be used in these spaces at these times, these are times that they cannot be used. Like I fully expect for him to kind of obey the rules. He's not a girl, so he's not like concerned about taking pictures of himself. Or if this was a girl conversation, I think I would be more worried.
Maybe,
like
they do
the
say,
selfie and the videos and like
boys
that's not him.
Tend to spend more time getting involved in video games, and girls will get more involved with pictures and with social media.
Right, which I feel like that's a little bit scarier. I think he can handle having the conversation about like risks. And I know if we had a conversation about risks with him, he might even say, I don't want a phone. Because like sometimes he's such
maybe that'll be my story. You can have it, but let me tell you everything that'll go wrong.
He's such a rule follower. He would rather disengage with something that has the opportunity to go wrong than to like engage in something and use it in a healthy way. That's just like his natural disposition. I do think in some ways it would be good for him. He is a little bit more timid about like, I don't want to say cutting the cord with us, but he is a little more hesitant. He's a little more reluctant. Like he'd rather be home and be safe than like explore. And so like if he knows like in his pocket he has a phone, and if there was something to go wrong, like he could contact one of us, contact my parents. He could write anyone like in his immediate circle and know that like we're all right here. Mm-hmm. If that made him feel more comfortable, and would allow him to go a little further, right, and venture out a little bit more, I think that's a great thing, right? The phone has like, he doesn't even wear a watch. The phone has like a clock on it, so you like know what time it is. Like it's so it's good for like responsibility. Like, oh, you're gonna go to the park with your friends, that's great. Be home by 5. Like you have your phone that tells you, right? Or we went to the park, but now right, he's at the age now. I remember this in junior high, like, oh, we're staying for the basketball game after school. Right. But then like we used to walk there was like a 7-Eleven in town. It's probably like 6 blocks from the school. Yeah. And so like I remember like putting money in a payphone after school and being like, Mom, I'm staying for the volleyball game. We're going to walk to 7-Eleven after school. Like it's like, okay, just so you know where I am. Like,
okay, I understand that example, but now it's like, well, now we're going to talk about like him going to school with this device. Like I don't think you need it at school.
So maybe he doesn't need it at school. But I also would expect that he would be the kind of kid who's like leaves it in his locker because that's the rule. Like that's just kind of how it is. So I'm not really worried about that, but I do think it is like the next step, the next belt, in terms of like rite of passage, being able to like responsibly kind of control, relationships with his friends. And I think he could easily be the type of kid who gets left out, because he's not like a very domineering like personality. And we also don't live in a neighborhood with a ton of kids. So a lot of his friends, although we live in the same town, live in different neighborhoods. And now that he's in junior high, it's like across, the entire town. Yeah. And so people are in different pockets. So like, if someone from across, the busy intersection wants to play, I think that's fine. But if I know where they live, I can drop them off. But, sometimes we're to the point where now we're not going to know all of our kids' friends' parents. Right. And so, I think that changes the dynamic. So I think he's ready to be responsible, to carry one, to follow the rules. And ultimately, I don't want him to be left out socially. Like he's a little bookish, a little nerdy, which are great things for us as parents. Like he's going to turn out just fine, but I don't want him to get left behind because he's the weirdo that doesn't have a cell phone.
All right, a couple side questions. So if we give him a phone, does that mean I get a new phone? If he's going to get, like, say, my old one? My current phone.
First of all, you're a grown-ass man. If you want to buy yourself a phone, buy yourself a phone.
Well, I don't need one, but as long as we're
I
giving him
also
a hand-me-down.
bought myself a new one in September, and so my old one has just been sitting in the drawer.
Does it charge and work?
I'm pretty sure it does.
Okay. Second question. The phone number that he gets with this, is that going to be his phone number for the rest of his life?
Probably.
Right. It's just interesting to think about.
That's your big takeaway from the show.
Okay. So what's on the phone? We hand it to him. What's on it? What is he allowed to use?
iMessage, right? So that's chatting with friends. What else is on there? He does now have an email through school, which works on the Chromebook. I believe it's like a Gmail. I don't know if it works like if there's school email, I think that's fine.
It's all the kids don't need to email.
No, but I think again, it's like one of those next steps. Like maybe our kid does get an email address, and we kind of start to
Do you have to be at least 13?
I don't know. You have to be 13 for a lot of things, and I see a lot of people with TikTok accounts that aren't 13, so they're 7. I don't know. What else is on our phone? I'm like, oh, mine has all my social media, Canva, stuff I use for work.
Here's a couple of things. So I think texting and the actual phone,
Calling,
for sure.
yes.
Yeah. What about internet access? Does he have Safari on it? And he can just look up something when he wants to.
Can you even take Safari off a smartphone?
I think you can limit it. I'm sure you've got to. There's got to be a way.
There's probably restrictions.
Just because, and not that I'm speaking from experience, but you get to a certain age where you get curious about the world, and you start looking up things that.
But he's going to look up those things no matter how many devices do we have here. He could ask the Google on the kitchen counter for it.
Well, see, that's kind of out in the open.
Not if we're not home and he's by himself. It is out in the open, but.
Yeah. So that's one thing I think about is just in terms of how accessible is all things internet.
When you were that age, did you ever curiously look up one of those types of things?
Yeah.
Okay, and where did you do that?
On our dial-up internet, or I turned on the Spanish television program. I turned on Univision.
Okay.
Univision.
Right. So, you still had access to it, and I mean, no offense, you guys were locked down, no cable, no nothing, and you still were able to find it if you needed it, weren't you?
Right, but it's it wasn't built for those sorts of things.
No, but so we are not going to be able to control what he surfs, but at night he's been listening to audiobooks on his Chromebook.
Well,
that you know of, you know what I mean? You could always play that, but I think you have to know and trust your kid and check their search history.
Yeah, I'm okay. So what about, I think we agree, podcasts would be useful for him. What about games?
Does he really need a game on his cell phone?
No, I don't think so. Okay.
So just like everything else, he's got the Xbox and there's certain games he has, and sometimes he asks to download new games or, the same thing, Leo with Roadblocks or whatever it is. It's he can ask all he wants, and then it's up to us to decide, I've never played Wordle. Apparently the whole world is playing Wordle, but is that something if he wanted to play, I would let him play? I don't know. Maybe. But
I don't think there's an app for that.
Okay.
Specific.
I don't even know what it is. So,
yeah.
But the thing is if he's only allowed to be on his phone for talking or texting friends, why would he just have it out playing games?
Okay. I'm just asking.
Right.
So you could have just said no.
Well, I'm working through it. It's not like I have all the answers. I just think, I think that he can handle it, and I think that he's ready for it, and I think that, it comes with with great power comes great responsibility, and for us as parents, we have to kind of walk through this, with him.
Okay. All right. So we'll do a trial run. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's a few parameters. One is we'll do texting. He'll get a phone number, and he'll have internet access. It's pretty much what it'll be used for at first. Games and social media will keep off the table for the time being. I think that, like we said, we'll figure out what it'll cost monthly, but I think he's on the hook for that, and I think that's a good thing. And then he'll be thinking about what he needs to earn, whether it's raking leaves or getting a paper route or whatever kids do these days to earn a few bucks.
Are there still things as paper routes?
No, but
okay, just check. I'm just
the equivalent. Maybe
You're so old sometimes.
well, maybe he could come up with some sort of like online digital marketing scheme, like what I'm sure the modern equivalent of paper
You can
routes
sell
now.
Tupperware. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, we make that available to him, and then we'll figure out some of the parameters. Like, I think that this is something that kind of stays in the kitchen drawer, and then like you'll ask to use his Xbox,
Right,
or
with
like,
permission or at certain
there's kind of
times.
like set times that you can use it, or like set permissions that he has to ask for.
Yeah. And, like he's only going to get older. And so like we were kind of talking about this in the car the other day, like, right. Roman hasn't even started playing sports or any of that, but like Jack is going to end up coming to all of like the little kid stuff at some point. And like, that's not going to be fun for him. So at some point, if he's like at a baseball game with like a podcast in, or he's, chatting with his friends, like, I don't think that's the end of the world. Because we've got kids on both ends of the spectrum. And so not that he needs to be entertained all the time, because he needs to engage and interact with what's going on with the family. But, I mean, let's cut the kids some slack.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get a kid a phone.
What was that?
We're going to get a kid a phone.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay. Well, I'll put you in charge of the timeline for that.
Okay.
And then I'll just look up anything that we need to related to how to...
Right, like a new SIM card for the
Yeah.
phone and whatnot. And if you want to get a new phone, you can. That's...
I don't.
Okay, yep. For those of you who are listening, I think I got a cell phone. My parents, it was like 16 or 17 with like parameters. It was a flip phone at the time. And it was like, because we had started driving, we had cars, and it was like, this is case of emergency. Like, we weren't like talking and texting with friends really at that point on cell phones. Jordan leaves for college, still does not have a cell phone, refuses to get a cell phone, goes through his entire freshman year of college without a cell phone. He was at U of I was at DePaul. So we were like 3 hours apart, and we had to use calling cards.
Prepaid calling cards.
I had to like
Perfectly ordinary for the times.
how like 18 digits before I could
2005.
like answer. Like, was it 2005?
I think it was like
2000
32 digit
Like, yeah,
code on, yeah.
Heaven help you if you
Then the
messed up
phone
one
number,
digit.
yeah.
Then the phone number, and it was a thing because he was very reluctant to having a cell phone and whatever. And then I think by like sophomore year, you finally like broke down and we could just call each other.
Yeah. I feel, and this is maybe a separate conversation. Now we get into like how we use phones, but I feel like it's like the one ring sometimes. Like there's this scene where Bilbo is trying to like leave the ring for Frodo. I know this is
The One Ring. I'm like a ringtone. Oh,
the Lord of the Rings.
Lord
yeah.
of the Rings. Here we go.
Right, but it's this insidious thing that kind of just attaches to your subconscious. And so he thinks he leaves it in one place, and it turns out it was actually in his pocket the whole time. I think that's a phone for us, right? I keep thinking that I leave it somewhere else, like I want to distance myself from it, and then it's in my pocket. I don't know what that has to do with this, but it's another talking point for our son. So we need to develop almost like a curriculum. I'm sure this is out there somewhere too.
Oh, I
like
bet.
all the conversations to have with your kid as they come of age, from age 11 to whenever, till they're 18 and end up leaving the home. Like all the different things about your digital footprint and digital citizenship and social media.
Which the school has been doing that with our kids. They do that every year. Which, I remember even Jack, our oldest now, is like, you can't search Google on your Chromebook because, it's illegal and you can't do it. Like, I think they do a good job putting parameters, but I think as parents, like, we're the ultimate kind of like,
yeah, I don't want to
safeguard here.
outsource that's a
Right.
parent's job.
But just saying, just
100%.
like we talked about, you talk about digital citizenship at school, it's the same thing when you now have a personal device.
Okay, so I think we've made a decision, people. We would love your input, though. Many of you are thinking, like, your kid's 11, you haven't gotten them a phone yet? Like, come on. Did they years ago, and it's been fine. I would love to hear that. And others of you who are still on the fence, I hope this conversation has helped. Do you have any final takeaways? Any final thoughts?
No, I just wonder how this conversation will go when Leo is about to turn 12. It says, well, when Jack was 12, he got a cell phone. And wondering if we'll be like as strict about allowing him to have one, or if the difference in your children maybe impacts what they get at the same age.
Yeah.
Because
So-
now we're like setting like a
This is a precedent, yeah.
precedent. So it's like if, Jack at 18 is going to be like, Roman's 7 and he has a cell phone. I had to wait until I was 12. Like, you get that,
He's 7 years old.
back and forth.
Yeah. So my general takeaway is just for all of us that this parents need to have this conversation. That's part of why you and I wanted to just have this like kind of on the air, was to hopefully model for other parents the kinds of considerations that should be brought up and really haggled through. I don't think it's just a blind decision. But ultimately, like you have to do what's best for your kid. Like every kid is in slightly different circumstances. I know I read one example where the parents are divorced, and so it's kind of helpful to like stay connected with one parent while you're with the other, and then it might make total sense to get it at a much earlier age. And there's a range of other circumstances too, and even it depends on the kid, like we said. So you and I will have this same conversation in a few years with our second son, and we might come to a completely different conclusion too, just based on who that kid is and what feels right. So we're not talking about social media specifically. That in itself is a whole nother conversation on top of this one.
Oh gosh. Well, we've got more content for years to come, don't we?
Yeah. But we also have to realize that we can't shield them forever. And so, like you said at the beginning of the conversation, like how do we get them acclimated to this at a time that we can still teach them?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway.
Okay. Well, we, like we said, would love some input from many of you who have gone down this path already. And if you, or maybe if someone you know is having similar contemplations, go ahead and forward this episode, this conversation to them, and maybe they can commiserate with two parents trying to figure things out. In the meantime, why don't you head over to iTunes? And as always, our invitation is still standing to leave a 5-star rating and a review. We love your feedback.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to today's show. We hope you will use this conversation as a starting point for your own. We hope you're encouraged to think and act more intentionally.
If you want to learn more, you can visit our website, therelentlesspursuitpodcast.com, where you can find notes on today's show, plus additional blog posts, and you can subscribe to our free members list.
Please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends.
Facebook and Instagram are two great places to connect with us for daily doses of our quotable quotes, behind the scenes, and real-time photos, videos, and challenges.
Until next time, let us know how you are taking life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursuing what matters.